Welcome to the Shabby Detective, yet another Columbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me, of course, is Mr. Chris Dashew.
It's me. I'm here from Playhouse 90.
This month, we are still on a little bit of a break from Columbo, and we're talking about a movie that was written by Richard Levinson and William Link, directed by Robert Markowitz. It was a TV movie from 1977, aired on December 5th, 1977, and it is called The Storyteller. This is not Jim Henson's The Storyteller. If you go out and you start looking up The Storyteller, that's probably going to be the first thing that comes up. This was from 77. That was from 81. This one stars Martin Balsam. The other one stars John Hurt, I think, is on the cover of that, or Michael Gambon or something. I don't know.
John Hurt and the Puppet Dog. Good name for a weird indie band.
And I'm sure that a lot of people love that. I have not experienced that one at all. I have experienced this one a few times, this TV film, which, interestingly enough, is very much a self-examination, I would say, by Lincoln Levinson about violence on television.
Jack Thompson somewhere is enjoying this. For those of you who don't know who Jack Thompson is the famous American lawyer who would sue video game publishers all the time for violence in video games, which is essentially this 1977's version of that 90s, mid-2000s, like back and forth. We can have this conversation broadly on this episode or on any episode of the show that we do, but I think Levinson and Link have always been very smart about the way that they do things. And I think that for two people living in 1977, they were very well dialed in to what was going on at the time. And to your point, like their, quote, place in things, unquote. I mean, again, Levinson and Link weren't making things of the time, I think, that were, quote, overtly violent, unquote. However, that's not really the point of this. The point of this is more, where do the responsibilities lie with media for the things that happen in real life subsequent to the media coming out that mimic or replicate or mirror media. I mean, as someone who enjoys the television show Dexter a fair amount, once that show came out, there were a rash of people who did the same thing. They weren't killing serial killers. They were just killing people because of course they were. And they were, quote, inspired by Dexter, unquote. That prompts the question in my mind of the mother of the character who passes away, who dies to the arson, says it to Martin Balsam. He's like, who wrote it? You did. Where does the responsibility begin is the question that this asks. And it also asks the question of, where does the responsibility end? And how many people are responsible? I mean, how many entities? Because it's less people specifically, but entities as well. I found this very interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily the most entertaining thing on the planet, but I think, and again, I think that's primarily because a lot of this is a vehicle for the discussion that we're going to have, less a trying to be eminently the most entertaining hour and a half on television at the time. So I enjoyed it, but I could see someone watching it and kind of finding it maybe a little, not a little dry, but maybe a little plodding. Also, just mention to the listener, this thing is impossible to find. Again, Mike mentioned trying to search for it. Trying to search for it's hard. Good luck finding it and watching it.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to upload this to YouTube and hope that it doesn't get a copyright strike. I don't know why it would, because this seems like an abandoned piece of media. I mean, to be honest, I don't even remember where I found this at. And you can tell that this was definitely been around, like looking at the provenance of the actual video file itself, you see breakup that comes from a VHS recording, but you also see like a countdown beforehand. So it feels like we're watching a 16 millimeter transfer of it, but then you also get a little bit of a commercial break that breaks in at one point. So you're like, okay, so was this taped off of TV or was this taped off of 16? Or like, how did this thing even come to us? And I'm not exactly sure. It's tough to tell how we got our hands on this.
We've talked about this on your show where you cover more of these kinds of things than I do. But on your show, you tend to cover things that are hard to find out of print. I mean, you have to search around for things. And I always kind of bristle at that because I like talking about things that people, not that I don't have to have people go out of their way to find, but you know what I mean? Like, this is a thing where, like, you got to really hunt this down.
Yeah, I know. I know you're really pissed off at me about what we're talking about next Wednesday, that obscure media, The Dark Knight Rises. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
One of the most obscure films I have ever heard of. To be fair, on your show, like that does not dissuade you from talking about things, the ability for your audience to find it. This is genuinely one of the few things I've talked about, I think, ever, and including, especially with you, that's like, I don't even know how anyone, like, you don't know how you found it. I don't know how anyone else would find it. And I think that, the reason I bring all this up and kind of belabor the point is that is probably the most unfortunate thing about the Storyteller is that it has kind of been, like you said, abandoned or lost to time because the conversation it's having is still one that people are having now, still in 2025. There was political violence that happened this year that was blamed on TV and video games once again. We're right back here 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years later. Like, as long as people have been making content, people have been ascribing meaning of other people doing similar things to that content and saying, troubled minds. It's like, well, troubled minds interpreting content are always going to interpret it troubledly. Like, there's not going to be any sort of rational thinking when a troubled mind interprets something. So how does one fight that? I don't know. I'm curious. What did you think of the Storyteller and the message that it's kind of trying to get the audience to engage with it in?
I'll tell you, the first time I watched it, I can't say I was bored, but I felt like it was kind of plotting. Once we get into the story, there are some very long sequences, a lot of dialogue. Like you're saying, this does feel like something that they are setting up for us to talk about around the water cooler. Kind of one of these, tonight on CBS, there's a very special movie about violence on television. You should watch it with your family and discuss it. And which were things, that I'm sure you know of the phenomenon of very special episodes.
Oh my God. This is crack, rock cocaine. That's not an episode of Pee Wee Herman, but you have Pee Wee Herman advising children to not do crack. So that was always the like very special moment with Pee Wee Herman. I always think of the Michael Jordan meme, the stop it, get help. Like it's in that same vein of like, again, proselytizing, preaching, don't do drugs, don't Care Bears was, stranger danger and don't take candy from strangers. Like the very special episode, I do miss it in a way, on a very special episode of How I Met Your Mother, Barney Stinson has AIDS. Like, yeah, there's none of that anymore, even though you have like Neil Patrick Harris playing the world's most promiscuous character on television. So it's kind of fallen out of fashion. I don't know why. I guess you just Google it now. You just Google information. I need to have the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles telling me about my credit card data being stolen. I could just search on the internet about it.
Hello, I'm James Gandolfini. Tonight on a very special episode of The Sopranos, we talk about the effect that violence can have on your community. The character that I played, Anthony Soprano, gets into a little bit of trouble, and you really need to be careful when it comes to just how you use your words and actions.
He's just a character on TV, folks. I'm a nice man in person.
We kind of got that a little bit in some of those Barney Miller episodes, like,
we did 100%.
but luckily they blended a lot of stuff with the humor. But yeah, I never watched what was the one with AC Slater and those folks, but like
Saved by the Bell.
and they had the one, is it Elizabeth Berkley was on like the caffeine pills or something? And
The Final Destination, like, joke music video that Saved by the Bell has the character dying because of those caffeine pills. So I'm assuming that's where that's from. Another show I've never watched, but I'm assuming they had to have had at least several of those episodes, right? Like,
well, and I was very scarred by I think it was a double episode of Different Strokes where the guy that was Mr. Carlton on WKRP in Cincinnati basically was trying to molest two of the characters, including Arnold Drummond. That fucked me up for a long time.
the fuck?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This was a real thing. This was very like, you would just be watching, that meme of, I think it's like Henry Cavill standing there talking to a reporter, and you've got Jason Momoa in the background, like sneaking up on you. That was how it felt when you were watching television, because you never knew when one of these things was going to happen. And then it would just be like, boom, very special episode, Richie's taking heroin, something like that. And you're just like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah. In a very special episode, the gang gets hooked on crack.
So this one, it's not as heavy handed. And that was the one thing that you can kind of look back at some of those episodes of very special episodes of Facts of Life or Different Strokes or any of these kind of things and be like, okay, that was super heavy handed because you had to fit in all this stuff within 30 minutes, or in the case of Different Strokes, it was a two-parter. And that also kind of screws you up when they don't conclude the story in a nice, brief 30 minutes, But I don't think that the Storyteller is that heavy handed. I think they're very smart when it comes to telling this, even when you look at the structure of the story and you're like, within the first 5 minutes of this movie, you have this man on the street interview, this Vox Populi thing, where it's like, okay, well, what do you think about violence on television? And then you get these people talking. They're obviously actors. I recognize a lot of these folks that are talking. And then you kind of go to black and you hear Martin Balsam just giving this pitch for a story. And he's definitely layering in a lot of violence in this story. You kind of come out of the credits into him in this room pitching this story to what looks like a television exec. They're like, okay, yeah, sounds great. Let's get going. And then you go to this school where you see all of these kids who are picking on another kid and they're bullying him. And I think it's the kid who eventually, like you said, burns down his school. You see him up at a window, closing the window. Before that, I think you see his teacher looking down at these kids and not doing anything. He just yells at them to basically stop doing that. And then has the kid close the window and you see the kid and the look on his face. And then you cut back to Martin Balsam, who's left the studio, and he's going by this wreck on the side of the road. And all of these reporters rushing over with their news cameras. And it's great to see like actual 16 millimeter news cameras and stuff here in 1977 and just sticking their cameras in these people's face where they're going through like one of the worst things in the world. Like this car is on fire. They've got the jaws of life trying to get this person out and all this stuff. And you're just like, okay, within the first few minutes of this thing, you're setting up all of these things like who's responsible? Who's responsible for what? Why are these reporters sticking their microphone in this person's face? Well, because it sells. Like all of this stuff is like because it sells. And like they do not pull any punches when it comes to talking about the violence of like a Starsky and Hutch or any of these police cop shows. I mean, to your point from earlier, as far as like Levinson and Link, they make their money off of murder. Like here we are talking about Columbo, and every single episode, one or two or more people get murdered, but it is almost always off screen. The violence is at such a minimum. And I love that towards the end of this, you actually get a reference to Crime and Punishment, which is what started off this whole discussion of Columbo.
Would it have been too much for them to mention Columbo?
It might have been.
I wondered that to myself when I was watching this, because I was like, are they gonna, I guess do they go to that extent? Because that's, I mean, again, Deadpool can be meta, but Deadpool, there's a limit to which the meta-ness of Deadpool works. And this is like, again, this is the discussion. This is a meta discussion. This is a television TV movie about TV violence. And like, this isn't violent, but this is this isn't just a documentary. This is a television movie about television violence. That's meta in and of itself. Like it's turning that high-powered lens on itself, which I really appreciate. But I was wondering, like, if they were going to mention Columbo in any capacity. I don't know. I was kind of curious your thoughts. Like, I almost wish they had, but I understand why they didn't, because maybe it would have been like, too much on the nose.
By this time, like Levinson and Link weren't that involved with Columbo. Like they created that, but it was going through, and we'll talk about this next month, had gone through so many different showrunners. They were just about to start on their new showrunner who, for better or worse, didn't like the Columbo formula. So he's going to shake some things up. Yeah, I don't know if it would have been smart or not to bring Columbo into it.
I just, you like you said, we've spent so long talking about their show, which is a show about people who are being murdered and a cop solving the murders. Even though there's not a lot of direct violence, you're part of this conversation, even in a kind of sideways way. So yeah, it's interesting. I will say I like Martin Balsam a lot. That's not surprising. I feel like every time we see him in something, either separately, when I'm seeing him in things, or because we've talked about him several times together on our show with Father Malone, Midnight Viewing. I like him here though, I like Doris Roberts too. I wish she was given more to do, but I like Martin Balsam a lot in this.
I love Martin Balsam as an actor. Every single time he shows up in anything, I just know that he's going to be good. And, things like the Taking in Pelham 1, 2, 3, or even his small role in Psycho, like, yeah, you always know that when he shows up, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm here for it. Whatever you do, I'm here for you. And he just has, oh, and I think he was also in 12 Angry Men, maybe, but
That's right, he was.
yeah. And yeah, he just has a lot of gravitas playing this kind of everyman character. And yeah, you've got top-notch people because playing his daughter's Patty Duke, who is just given a great performance as well in this whole debate that they're having as far as, yeah, I don't allow my daughter to watch television after supper. And basically it's like I'm trying to keep her calm and not present all of this stuff that my own father is responsible for, like the mayhem of it. So I like that there's that kind of like your own daughter doesn't support what you're doing kind of thing. And I like that they're running these parallel stories, not too much with the kid that burns down the school, but you do get him again one more time where he comes in. First thing he does, and by the way, no one at home, it looks like, he comes in and turns on the TV first thing, lays down and starts watching television. And it's like, all right, yeah, this is what this kid's doing. This is all that he's getting as far as this interaction, filling in his head with this. And I also really appreciate seeing the old spot for conserving water, which still is a problem in California. If only they'd rake their forests, they wouldn't have these fires.
Just turn the hose back on. Isn't that
All that water that's in the north, it just flows down from Washington.
that big pipe that the internet comes to us through? Mike, the internet is on the top half and the water is on the bottom. And it all comes from outside of that ring of Arctic ice that encircles our flat Earth, right?
I just heard that LA has finally gone away from coal power altogether, but they are 100% renewable energy, which these days is the most surprising thing I could possibly hear just because of the war on renewable energy, because people don't fucking understand how the sun or wind works or power itself.
Well, you know what they say, education, Mike, is a hell of a thing. And without it, people commit violent crimes that they copy from things they see on TV, I guess. I don't know. One of the things I was thinking about, and, this is, the high, I guess in my mind, and I know you and I kind of differ on our, I wouldn't say interpretations, but I think the way we receive this film, it's one of my favorite movies. High Fidelity. I think the question that John Cusack asks at the beginning of that movie, I think is a very apropos one. Why is all of this directed at movies and TV? Like and this is me speaking as someone who is going through some kind of turmoil and heartbreak right now. I don't resonate with anything as much as and even movies, which I watch all the time. I resonate, like music hits me like a ton of bricks, more so than, I can hear a song and bang, I will just be full on in a completely different emotional state. Like it'll be like, please turn that off. Like that will it'll bring me right back to some moment or something. Television and movies don't do that for me. And I wonder where that disconnect is, because again, like we're talking about this from 1977 when people were concerned then about people copying the things that they were saying on television. The other thing that I find interesting, and I went and read some Letterboxd reviews about the film, like the 5 that there are. And someone said something I think is very interesting, which is, it feels like a little bit of a dodge here, what they're doing. And I will agree. The thing that they should have been talking about is not arson. It should have been gun violence. And then I think this might not have been lost to time, Because imagine if this had come out in 1977 talking about gun violence in schools. Again, everybody talks about Columbine. Columbine obviously is kind of like the watershed moment for violence at schools, but things like this were going on before that. The guy went to the tower at UT long before those two assholes were shooting kids in Colorado. Like that guy was shooting at poor Texas students long before Klebold and Harris decided to go act like assholes in trench coats.
Well, they weren't the only shooters. I read that insanity the other day, that there's a whole thing that it's being covered up. There was more shooters in there. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, we talked about the gun back in January of this year. It's kind of interesting that we're ending the year where we started it, because we talked about the gun, which was also this Lincoln Levinson thing from 74, where it's like, look at how violence is affecting here and how this gun moves from person to person to person. I agree with you. Gun violence would have been a little bit more interesting. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, yeah, this whole repetition of what you see, but then also being a different interpretation, because it wasn't, it was somebody who was burning down something else that wasn't their school. It was a very, a different circumstance for that.
Right. I guess it doesn't take a hard enough stance for me with the thing that's happening on screen being replicated in person. And that's where it's knock on it. It's just a tad hollow because again, if it had been gun violence, which again, Lincoln Levinson are 100% already clearly willing to discuss. Like that's the thing, again, to go back to the point of the gun, like they already had that discussion. So maybe that's why they don't do it here. But that wasn't so much a discussion as much as look, this is what can happen. And this is how this happens in violence. This is much more kind of, as we've said already, this might be a little plotting, or this might not necessarily be as sharp or as cutting as it could have been otherwise. I think this is more cutting than the gun was. I think this is a little bit more focused than the gun was, because the gun, I think was a little bit more, not esoteric, but the gun was a little bit more hands-off with its message. This is very much like, and he's the main character, and he's the one who wrote it, and we're going to go see everything that he does, and we're going to stay with him pretty much the whole time. Like, it has a different kind of context to the way it's playing out than the gun did. The gun was very much like vignettes, and some of them you could kind of see from a mile away how bad it was going to get. I appreciate what this is doing more in terms of the commentary that it's adding to the conversation about violence on television being replicated in person.
You're talking about like, oh yeah, way before Columbine. I mean, in my life, I have heard so many different excuses for what causes violence and so many things to be blamed. I mean, there's the whole thing of like, oh yeah, Suicide Solution by Ozzy Osbourne. That's the thing that caused this kid to shoot himself in the head, and the bullet ricocheted off, and so he's still alive and he's all fucked up now. And it's like, it's basically ass face from the Preacher comics, and it's like, okay. And so it's like, for a while, it's like, oh no, it's the music that's doing it, and then no, it's the TV shows that are doing it, or no, it's this movie. Like, oh, Natural Born Killers is going to cause people to go out and murder people, and it's just constantly one thing after another after another. I mean,
speaking of The Dark Knight Rises,
I mean, through my life, I've seen the PMRC and the congressional hearings around music being such a horrible thing, and people being exposed to like, oh my God, Tipper Gore caught her daughter listening to Darling Nikki by Prince. How horrible is that? Or like, this music is causing violence, or now, and then it became video games after a while. And it's like, I always wonder, like, back in like, I don't know, the 1400s or something, is it like, oh my God, this kid looked at a tapestry and then went out and shot someone with a crossbow? Like, well, how far back does it go that we have to blame things on things that people see, or are people that simple-minded that they just, and I know that they are. I know there are people that are so simple-minded that they will see something and be like, oh, that's so cool, I'm going to do it myself. There are people that dress after movies. They will wear their hair because of a certain music video, like any of those kind of things. But it's just like, all right, can you just blame that? Like, how much do we have to protect people from themselves?
The idea of violence and how pervasive violence is. Violence is so pervasive in our media that we've kind of just given it almost a pass. And, this film is not yet rated one of my favorite documentaries of all time. spends half of that movie just talking about how we're more focused on the violence, or not focused on the violence, frankly, I guess, and more focused on the sex of it all and our like the puritanical nature of our country. But I don't think I think for me, the thing that this comes back to, and this is something that, again, I struggle with, someone who's diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. I think people are just generally mentally unwell. I think people are generally unwilling to take care of themselves, take responsibility for their actions, take responsibility for the way they do things or treat people, and for the ways that they react to the things that they see. I mean, you can blame TV and movies and music, but we should be blaming the people who react to them the way that they react to them, because no one, unless it's a snuff film or an audio recording of someone being murdered, is actually being hurt in the process of making these things. There are literally guidelines in place while they're making these things to ensure that people don't get hurt. Because when people do get hurt, it often doesn't go very well. It goes quite poorly, like Vic Morrow in fucking the Twilight Zone movie. Like, people aren't getting hurt in the making of these things. So why can you blame the media where real things aren't happening on the real things that happen? Because people who, like you said, are, simple, or just, again, I empathize so much with people with mental illness, obviously, as someone who is, diagnosed this past year with it, and I struggle with it on a daily basis. But when you do stuff like this, that's just your inability to handle it in a healthy way. And not only are your inability to handle it, but your inability to even communicate to someone else that something is wrong. It's unfair to media to blame media for people's mental health struggles not being taken care of, because, like you mentioned with gun violence, thoughts and prayers, always what people are saying after a gun violence is perpetrated, frankly, anywhere at this point, but especially in schools. People should be saying, thoughts and prayers, but honestly, like, go talk to a therapist. Go speak with someone who's unbiased. Like, I'm so glad that I have the privilege of being able to speak with someone who's an unbiased opinion once a week, who will tell me what is going on with me, and being able to see the externalizations that I have. I think if more people did that, this would be less of an issue. I don't think violence in television is to blame. I think unstable people will do unstable things because unstable people are ultimately unstable. It's that statement that you hear all the time. Hurt people hurt people. They do. And hurt people sometimes tend to be people with mental illness. And they don't talk about it in this movie very much, but there's clearly some of that that's going on here. Like, and it's just, again, it's easier to look at something else that's so, I wouldn't say obvious, but loud, and then blame that versus like the quiet thing. Talking about the quiet part out loud is important, especially in this day and age, because we live in a day and age of people just having their worst mental health crises essentially, I don't know, like, explained away by just like, well, it is just what it is. It's like, it's not. And if we continue to act this way, these things will continue to happen, and we'll continue to have these conversations where violence is being blamed, real life violence is being blamed on people slashing at werewolves in a fucking movie with Kate Beckinsale.
Well, and the whole thing of who's to blame, like, immediately, who's to blame, who's to blame, who's to blame. And the whole thing of like, you have any sort of violence that's happening right now in the real world, especially in the US, and you're just like, well, I hope it wasn't a person of color. I hope it wasn't a trans person. I hope it wasn't this. I hope it wasn't that, because they're already getting all of this shit just being thrown at them. And it's like, as soon as that happens, it's like, see, look at this person, look at this. Yeah. And it's like going back to Oklahoma City. Like, as soon as that happened, it was like, oh, we are looking at all of the Arabic people that are in our state. And it's like, yeah, it ended up being a couple white guys from Michigan.
Mike, they're still looking for that third guy.
And we still have all of these fucking militias around here. And yeah, Michigan, just within the last few years, we had the incident at Oxford. We just had the whole thing with the guy crashing his truck into the Mormon church, Latter-day Saints church, and burning the place down. I mean, I was just talking before we started recording about some of the people that I work with. That was one of my coworkers' girlfriend's grandfather was one of the victims of that thing. So it's like, it's getting closer and closer to home every single time one of these things happens. and it feels like it's just a matter of time until it happens to you.
I am recording this podcast from my parents' house in Allen, Texas, where not but 5 miles up the road, the outlet mall that I go to every time I am here was the site of gun violence perpetrated on people for no reason with a assault rifle. A fair amount of people, like essentially an entire family, but one of the family members was murdered, and the one that was left alive was like a small child. Always very sad. But this is one of those like overwhelmingly sad things. Every store at the outlet mall has an Alan Strong thing, still like 5 years on. I don't even remember. It's been so long. And to your point, like my parents go to that outlet mall. There's nothing to say that they wouldn't have been there. There's nothing to say that I couldn't have been visiting and there as well. And it's scary to me because to your point, like it does feel like the net is ever kind of shrinking and closing. And at some point, someone I know will be directly affected by it. And like you said, you know someone who's been directly affected, but I mean like even more directly affected. Like in like a because like that's like third ring of people in your life. Like I'm talking like first or second ring of people in my life. And that's very scary because, again, like we don't have the discussion about mental health in this country enough. We don't. And I think it's a shame because as someone who, like I said, has diagnosed mental illness, was with someone who struggled with their mental illness, I will continue to struggle with my mental illness. It's a conversation that needs to be had out in the open. Because if we're willing to have this conversation out in the open and blame, again, just to use an example that's so outlandish, no one should be using this as a real example, but people pointing twigs at each other and screaming spells and the spells flying out of the ends of the wands and them flying through the air after being hit with them. No one should look at that and go, if someone commits violence, it's because of Harry Potter. Like, or something like, again, in that similar vein of like, this is now just fantasy violence and yet it's being kind of characterized or blamed for things. If we're willing to have this conversation out loud about television shows and movies that are violent affecting the way people are, then we should be willing to have the conversation about mental health. To your point, though, I think the other thing that's interesting about this is this asks a question that rarely gets asked, which is how many people are to blame for these things coming out? If we want to take the stance in the argument, I think it would be interesting to discuss that a little bit is let's take the stance that television shows are to blame for violence, right? Where does that start and stop? And I think that that's what's interesting about this is having a conversation about that, which most things never have. Because like you said, like we can point at Martin Balsam and say, well, it's his fault. But really, like there is a system and entities in place that are allowing all of these things to happen. Because Martin Balsam didn't just write it and then it appear. There were people that everyone came to set. Everybody was on set. The editors and everybody and the producers, everybody okayed it. But yet here is Martin Balsam just being piled on. And it's very interesting because the lack of accountability is very interesting in all of this. Because do you think anyone on Natural Born Killers, if violence had happened in real life, do you think that the craft service people felt bad if it did? Like, again, it's the old conversation from Clerks that Kevin Smith has. Like, why did all these janitors on the Death Star deserve to be blown up? Like, again, there are people that are just doing a job. I'm not saying that that's okay, but sometimes that is part of the conversation. So I'm curious. Like it was a curious thing for me because they don't talk about that very much in these kinds of things.
No, and they've got this whole thing of like, well, you've got the network, you've got the advertisers, you've got the execs, you've got the producers, you've got these people that approved all these things, and then is it the parent? Do we go back to the parents? Is it the parents that allowed this kid to do that? The parents weren't home. The parents didn't know that the kid had left, yada, yada, yada. Is it reporters? Is it the media that is creating this thing to this environment for these violent TV shows? Is it just a reflection of the news? Like I like that conversation that Balsam has with he talks directly to two reporters at least through this film. There's the woman who lies to him and says that her car is parked down by where his car is parked, and he pretty much calls her out on it and is just like, well, I know you're lying to me. Your car isn't around here. You're just following me, trying to get an interview, trying to get a sound bite. And we live in like not even just a world of sound bites anymore. Now it's just, rage bait headlines and
send bits.
Oh, I've been having the worst time lately seeing new quote unquote news of things, of stories that are decades old. Like, I'm seeing news stories today, the day we're recording. I saw this news story, quote unquote news. Jim Carrey almost quit The Grinch because of the makeup and how awful it was. And I'm like, how long ago did The Grinch come out? Like, this was news then. Why is it 2025 and we're talking about that now? Or like the other day, I saw this article and it was like, did you know that the woman who played Moaning Myrtle in, speaking of Harry Potter was actually 37 years old? I'm like, yeah, that's not hidden information. You can look that up. And I did probably 15 years ago. It's like, why are you guys doing this? Is there nothing going on in the world that's maybe a little bit more important than a news story that's 2 decades old? Come on.
It's weird. I saw a headline today that said Donald Trump still president. I was like, that can't be true.
No, no, no.
It just, oh no, that says today's headline. It's not 10 years ago. No.
Speaking of mental health, I mean, we have an insane person in charge of things. And this whole idea of if you admit that you have mental problems, you are perceived as weak. That is your problem. Why can't you get better? Why can't poor people buy more money?
As someone who is struggling with mental health, who caused a relationship to end because of mental health, I have been availing myself to be more accountable, and it really bothers me when people aren't accountable, because accountability is the first motherfucking step. And that's the thing, like with this that I think is interesting is while Lincoln Levinson don't mention Columbo, this is them taking ownership of their part in any of this by saying, look, we can't necessarily do anything about it because we want to still create content. And I don't think it's a good idea to say like, well, we're censoring all violence now, because that doesn't work out well for anybody. I mean, no one. Good content is made in bad and hard times. That is the truth. The best content even is made in good and hard times. But I think the censorship of content is a very slippery slope. And the fact that we already have a censorship board in existence with our content as it is that doesn't seem to be very fair and unbiased would lead me to believe that any further regulation in terms of violence would just lead people down the path of micromanaging away what is considered violence to the point of like, where do you draw the line at what is and isn't comic violence or comic style violence or whatever weird qualifiers they give now with G and PG movies where it's like comic style violence, not directed at the head or face. And it's like, what specific piece of information is this for? Like, there are already those things out there, those like Christian moms watch media, or it's common sense media, I think is what it's called. I actually don't have a problem with websites like that. If you want to watch these kinds of movies with your family and that's the kind of thing that bothers you, not knowing what's in something ahead of time, maybe just watch it. But I understand if you have some sort of secondary vetting process. But I think all of that to say, when we have violence in things, blaming violence is like blaming the smoke on the fire. Like the fire's still there. You're just blaming the smoke. And you can die from smoke inhalation. Smoke takes away the ability to inhale oxygen. You can die from smoke. Nobody's saying you can't. But the fire of violence in our country directed at people, for me, is mental health, more or less the underlying issue, because mental health is the only thing that all of us share. Not everybody even has guns. You can't commit gun violence if you don't have guns, which is, I think, maybe the benefit to the violence in this is that it's not gun violence, so that it is just kind of, well, anyone could go light a fire.
See, if we get rid of guns, people are just going to start stabbing each other. And if we take away the knives, then pretty soon we're just going to chase each other around with pieces of wood with nails in them.
That board with the nail in it may have defeated us, but the humans won't stop there. They'll make bigger boards and bigger nails. Soon they will make a board with a nail so big it will destroy them all.
I was going to say, if we take away all the guns, then when these zombie Western fighters reanimate, we won't be able to defend ourselves. Also, to quote The Simpsons, as a child of the 90s, as someone whose parents took away their copy of Mortal Kombat that they were gifted for their birthday, for their PC as a child because my parents, quote, said it was too violent, unquote. I have always had a hard time with this topic because I hate that anyone would watch a guy who can freeze you with his hands ripping someone's head off and going, see, I could do that in real life. Unstable people do unstable things. And if they see something, they're just, honestly, it just makes them more creative. That's it. That's all it does. Like,
Sid, don't you blame the movies. Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
if you're predisposed to this because of untreated mental illness or other things, it does, you could see Elmo hitting Grover over the head and go, that's enough for me. Like if your brain and mental health are so unstable, that's enough in that capacity. So it's, I wish the conversation would change, but I think that's a much harder conversation to have, which is why we don't have. It's not a fun conversation either.
I really like how they keep doing these little Vox Populi spots throughout the whole thing. It's interesting. I don't think that the IMDb has credit for William Bogert, who I mostly know as playing Matthew Broderick's dad in War Games, but he had been in a ton of things, including Dog Day Afternoon as a TV anchorman, which, that was such a, do we put this person on television because they're so violent, or do we not do that? And like this whole thing of like, and they watch the television and get information from the television. And like I'm going to be putting together an episode pretty soon about a real life case that inspired the film Dead Man's Wire that's coming out from Gus Van Sant. And there's this documentary and they're talking about like, oh yeah, the guy who is holding this person hostage is there listening to the radio, and the radio's giving him all of these updates about what the cops are doing. So it's just this like, can you not report on this? No, we have to report on this. And it's that whole like, how far can the media go when it comes to these things? How much of the media also is staged when it comes to the whole idea of like, I carry around a teddy bear in my car so I can throw the teddy bear down and take a picture of that in front of destruction just to be like, look at the human factor of this. It's like, those things really happen. Or you get like broadcast news where William Hurt's making himself cry. And it's like, okay, this is the B-roll. Here's William Hurt, so they can cut this in just to show him, so greatly affected by this, even though they shoot these interview segments versus the question segments at different times. Yeah, when they pull back the cover like that, it's always just like, that's fascinating to see just how much we're being manipulated.
Not only are we being manipulated, but we're manipulating ourselves. I think about, again, something that's, I think, one of the most like horrific things all of Western society saw together kind of at once, being those planes crashing into those World Trade Center towers. I mean, I always joke with my mom about that just kind of banal, tepid Alan Jackson, where were you in the world? Like, good Lord, like way to minimize and trivialize what is, I think, one of the most disturbing things any one of us has ever seen, which is thousands of people's lives dying, like being snuffed out in an instant. Not to quote Star Wars, but I mean, it's one of the things that you can't unsee it now that you've seen it. But there's a weird thing about 9/11 that some people tend to forget, which is there was a whole uproar about images of the people jumping out of the buildings being shown, including the jumping man, which there is a fantastic kind of like shorter documentary about it, where they're kind of like trying to figure out who the identity of his was, because they had never really known. But there was such an uproar about a picture of a guy falling. But yet I wasn't necessarily not aware because I was 11 at the time. But correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. If memory serves, they were looping those planes crashing into those towers over and over and over and over and over and over again, to the point where if I close my eyes right now, I can see that picture-in-picture shot of the two towers, one already on fire and the plane slamming into the other one. You know what I mean? I can see that in my mind.
This is really morbid, but the day that the Challenger exploded, my friend Leon was telling me, he's like, I've got it timed now because they keep showing this footage over and over again. I've got it timed now that I can do a finger gun and basically make the Challenger explode. And that was how they were doing things. Like when you just have that little bit of information, as you know, with 9/11, or I know with like Reagan being shot, they were parodying that on Saturday Night Live with Buckwheat, the Eddie Murphy Buckwheat character being shot, and they just kept showing the same clip over and over and over again. And it was supposed to be funny, and it kind of was because it was, Eddie Murphy, but at the same time, it's like, this is really upsetting because this is how the news media works. They're trying to parody it, but it's so bad that it's almost beyond parody.
Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel. Surely everyone knows by now that Buckwheat is dead. But for those of you who have not seen the videotape of Buckwheat being shot, let's take a look.
This talks about the created violence in the media, right? I mean, again, Martin Balsam is, the fingers being pointed at him. All of this footage that we see of, I don't know, Venezuelan, quote, narco terrorists, unquote, being blown up, or any amount of footage coming out of Gaza, which if you have not exposed yourself to it, you should, because I think it's very important for anyone in this day and age to be exposed to that, even in the minorest form.
Are we allowed to look at that footage? Because as far as I know, what the Israelis are doing is perfect and wonderful, and just, you need to shut up, you anti-Semite.
Yeah, I've always considered myself a little bit more of a Yo-Semite as opposed to an anti-Semite. I don't understand, I guess, why it's so easy to blame fictional violence, which is being made for people to relieve the stress of the real world and relieve the tension and strain of the real violence. Why we don't just look at that as a positive way to unwind, as opposed to somehow one-in-one parody with watching people literally being killed. People literally dying. The jumping man on 9/11, like, people got up in arms about that footage being shown, but nobody said fuck one about the footage of the planes, being run over and over and over again. It doesn't make any sense. And again, I think our society is so much more looking at the result as opposed to the cause, looking at how it ended up as opposed to how it started. And this, the storyteller, I think, says, look, everybody's to blame. There is no one person here who is not to blame. It is Martin Balsam's fault. It is anyone who produced it. It is anyone who, and it's not everyone, I guess. It's anyone who had a hand in doing something with it where you could have changed it in a substantive way. Producers, editors, writers. And again, what level of blame, how big of a scoop of pie do they eat to say this is the shit pie that I've created, or however the people in this are interpreting it? Because again, that's not me interpreting it. That's the way the people at the end result who are saying violence is, people are to blame for the violence that they see on TV. I think this takes a more interesting approach than most things, as opposed to saying it's not Martin Balsam's fault. It's kind of everybody's fault. Martin Balsam's just kind of part of it.
I think it's about halfway through the movie where he gets to see the audience watching one of these movies or TV shows.
With the little dials?
The dial, yeah. And I've done that before. I was actually in Vegas. They have a center, and I don't know if it's still there. I used to get emails from them all the time, but I haven't gotten one in years. And yeah, it's like, very dull, normal, good, very good. It's just like this dial that you turn to be like, oh, I like this. I don't like that. I watched the pilot for a TV show with Malcolm Jamal Warner, RIP, and Jason Alexander about a sports radio show or something like that. And I was just like, oh, this is interesting. This whole, like, I like this part. Oh, I'm kind of bored. Oh, I like this one too. And I'm just like trying to spike it around some of the better jokes and be like, oh, that was a bad joke. All right, I'm going to turn that dial down. But yeah, him just watching these people just kind of, oh, I like this, or I don't like that. And then, they're using quote unquote science in order to prove what people like, in order to tune their programming appropriately. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, what Martin Balsam is trying to do here is make money, support his family. The network's trying to make money. They're trying to find out the best ways that they can make money. I mean, everybody says it. Violence sells, and they're enjoying this. Oh yeah, very good. Oh, this is kind of dull here. It's kind of like me watching this TV movie, and I'm just like, oh, this is a little dull, but oh, here's an interesting part. Like here's the parents. All right. Oh, this is great. When I see those moments with the parents, and it's interesting that we see them separately, that we have the stuff with the mom. I really like the stuff with the other reporter played by John Porkus, I think it is. And he was terrific. I was really glad he's got the beard and everything, very much the different generation from Balsam. It's that young upstart type of guy. Hey, Woodward and Bernstein, what are you doing? But I've seen him like 1,000 times. And
Martin Balsam, though, kicked it long ago, unfortunately. Long ago.
he was a force for a long damn time. But the thing I was super happy about, so like the woman that plays the mother, very, very good performance, very cold, like her child just died, all this kind of stuff. Everybody's trying to blame her, trying to blame the parents on this stuff. But the scene towards the end, when Tom Aldridge comes in, one of my favorite character actors of all time, and we talk about him very often on the hopefully soon to be released What No Fucking ZD show.
That's right.
And my guy from The American Astronaut, it was so great to see him. And I'm just watching this performance. I'm like, this guy's great. Who is this? And finally, as I'm listening to his voice, I'm like, this is the guy from The American Astronaut. All right.
Carmilla's dad.
Yeah, it was great to see him. And that scene tore the heart out of me.
So this guy walks into a bar and he says to the bartender, "Can I use your phone?" Bartender says, "Sure." So he wipes his ass on it, and the bar... What? Oh, shit. Just told you the punchline. Been telling this joke so fucking long, I knew I'd fuck it up. Anyway. Want to hear something really weird?
That's the scene in this. I felt like in terms of like the back and forth performances. I mean, again, when you have him and Martin Balsam back and forth, like opposite one another, I don't know. I mean, it's again, I think it's it tore your heart out. Obviously it's emotionally arresting. And I think it's the kind of the moment that this thing, the thing being the storyteller, that the storyteller should have been remembered for. Like, this is the thing that you would like point to that and be like, in terms of having a discussion in a time before having this discussion was kind of a thing that was en vogue for the last 20 years. That scene would, I think, have been the thing where people would have been like, it was that from the storyteller was a thing worth holding on to. And it's a shame because this doesn't, it's not that this doesn't have anything to hold on to, just this hasn't been held on to. So it has kind of just been lost. And, there are plenty of boutique labels out there. There are more and more every day, literally. Everybody's looking for somewhere to shine a new shoe. Here's a new shoe that needs a little bit of shining, folks. So
I think I figured it out because as we're talking, I'm watching this at the same time. I think those countdowns that we're seeing, I think those are actual intentional things because they introduced two of the man on the street segments. So I think we're supposed to be clued in on that. I don't think that this was a 16 transfer. What there is that little blip of a commercial, there's the breaking of the control track, and right around 1 hour and 8 minutes, there is an on-screen thing that says Channel 2 WBBM TV Chicago. So this is a TV broadcast. It was that countdown that really threw me off because I've watched a lot of old movies where they are transferred off of 16 and you do get like a legit countdown that happens sometimes even between reels. There was a movie we talked about on the projection booth last year where you could see the reel changes and they would have countdowns between every single reel. I was like, wow. I mean, the first time I ever saw Jean-Pierre Melville's Magnet of Doom, that literally looked like somebody had projected it onto a sheet against a wall and somebody else because the video recorded that. It looked terrible. The print was pink. You could almost smell the vinegar coming off of it. It was awful.
The Storyteller, I think, is up there for me in terms of one of the stronger cases for worst quality things I've watched for any podcast. This was a rougher thing. And we did the Rankin on Bass podcast, and there were some things in there that were hard to track down and weren't being done any favors by the quality of what we were watching. But this Yeah, I'd like to see this get some sort of reappraisal. I mean, I think, Martin Balsam's a big enough actor. I mean, guy won an Oscar, was in, like we mentioned, plenty of things, Psycho, All the President's Men. I mean, those two, I mean, 12 Angry Men, plenty of things that are better for having him in it. So it is kind of weird that this got lost to time, as it were. But I'm glad that we were able to talk about it because I think Levinson and Link add something to the conversation here that they always do, which is they add a little bit of their own perspective. And I think that they have such a unique perspective on things that their perspective, especially given that they are purveyors of television violence in some capacity, I think it's important that creators avail themselves to do something like this from time to time. Because while it might seem a little, well, you're making a thing to make money about a thing, like it's like very meta in and of itself that you're making a thing about a thing about a thing. But I think it's important that creators, I mean, again, to go back to the whole accountability of it all, like I think it's important that creators hold themselves accountable and, don't blame yourself for the violence that's committed in the real world based on the things that you make. But if someone asks you to hold yourself accountable, say, well, I made it and that was my choice. Like it's, Martin Balsam says it in here. You've already said it. I'm here to make money and that's my job.
To call this the storyteller and to think about the importance of storytellers in the world. And just that there have been storytellers, you go back to another show that one day we might talk about, but looking at Amazing Stories, the Steven Spielberg produced thing, the opening credits of that, you've got the basically caveman sitting at a fire telling a story to the people around him. We live through our stories. As I've talked to you about things and you've talked to me tonight, we're sitting here going, oh, do you remember this? Well, there was this thing and this thing happened. And we're like telling each other these stories. That's how we connect. And this is how Martin Balsam makes a living. But also, when he's talking with his granddaughter, he's telling stories. Like this is so important to tell stories. And hopefully they just don't, lead to violence. I guess it's like, all right. But Martin Balsam as the storyteller, I would really like to see this get a proper release as well. Though I think ultimately at the end of the day, if I'm going to pull anything from this movie at all, it's that Starsky and Hutch is to blame for all the violence.
Yeah, I mean, David Soul's singing is Don't Give Up on Us, Baby. I mean, hey, I like that song, but I get that it's not for everybody. Especially not Owen Wilson's cover in the Todd Phillips directed Starsky and Hutch movie, which is way better than it has any right to be. And if it has caused any real life violence, boy, wouldn't that be a strange bit of meta-ness. I think, to your point, my big takeaway from the storyteller is, like you said, for as long as people have been around, people have wanted to be entertained and had stories told to them. And those stories, sometimes they're violent, sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're sad, sometimes they're horrific, and sometimes they're all of those things all at once. Indian cinema for me is always like the great melting pot of everything. Genre, the concept of genres, I don't think exists within Indian cinema, not in the same way they do here in the States. You can have everything under the sun, including violence. I saw a film last week that was 3.5 hours long that children were there and there was graphic violence. But at the same time, when society has just accepted it as part of the conversation and moved on to other things, we don't necessarily get all bent out of shape when we see it. And I think that something like The Storyteller is making the case that, yes, it is important to focus on the violence. And yes, I think that there are people to blame for the violence. But at the same time, we need to look within ourselves to take accountability of our part in this, like Martin Balsam does, like so many of the characters do, like we do here. I mean, again, we're sitting and trying to make our, scratch here as well. Like what we're doing is telling stories no different than anyone else, trying to make a living at doing it. And so there is a meta-ness to all of this, frankly. But the one thing I take away from this is, Martin Balsam, hell of an actor. Shame that this leading role of his is not being given appropriate kind of reappraisal. So if you're listening out there in indie movie distribution land, I don't know what the cost of the rights for this are, but they might be pretty cheap.
Well, when we come back next month, we are going to be going back into Columboville. We will be talking about the first episode of the 7th season, which actually aired, I think, about a month before the Storyteller did. And that is called Try and Catch Me. So until then, Chris, what are you up to these days?
All the things that I work on can be found over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where this show and all the other shows that we work on can be found. Your show, The Projection Booth, my show, The Culture Cast, Father Malone's show, Midnight Viewing. If you're a fan of his or have heard us mention his name like 8 million times on this episode, given Midnight Viewing came up with Martin Balsam. If you want to see more Martin Balsam and hear us talk about it, that's where you should go. What about you, Mike?
Pretty much the same thing, other than the one thing that you missed, which was our Patreon exclusive, which is at patreon.com/culturecast and patreon.com/projectionbooth, where once a month we talk about Rankin' on Bond, which is our James Bond podcast, which you can get at the $10 and above level. So come on over. We're quickly running out of bonds. We're going to have to figure out what else we can do as a Patreon exclusive. I've been proposing that we cover all of the Elvis movies, but nobody wants to listen to me.
I'd listen to you.
Chip inside her head gets switched to overload, and nobody's gonna go to school today. She's gonna make them stay at home. Daddy doesn't understand it. He always said she was good as gold, and he can see no reasons, 'cause there are no reasons. What reason do you need to be shown? Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. I wanna shoot the whole day down. The telex machine is kept so clean, and it types to a waiting world. A mother feels so shocked, father's world is rocked, and their thoughts turn to their own little girl. Sweet 16 ain't that peachy keen. Now it ain't so neat to admit defeat. They can see no reasons, 'cause there are no reasons. What reasons do you need? Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. I wanna shoot the whole day down, down, down. Shoot it all down. Now the playing stopped in the playground now. She wants to play with her toys a while. And school's out early, and soon we be learning. And the lesson today is how to die. And then the bullhorn crackles, and the captain tackles with the problems in the house and wife. And he can see no reasons, 'cause there are no reasons. What reason do you need to die? Die, oh. And the silicon chip inside her head gets switched to overload. Oh, and nobody's gonna go to school today. She's gonna make them stay at home. And daddy doesn't understand it. He always said she was good as gold. And he can see no reasons, 'cause there are no reasons. What reason do you need to be sure? Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. Tell me why I don't like Mondays. the whole day down.